Hello, everyone. This is a review video for the first set of study questions, the study questions for Kant's What is Enlightenment? This is something that I will do, hopefully on a regular basis, reviewing the study questions, giving you a sense of what I meant by the question, why I asked it, and what I was looking for in answers. I think this should help, as you are reading and rereading, looking over the text that we read for the course. And that's the most important thing, is to gain a better grasp of these great texts, most of them great, but also to prepare for the reading knowledge exams. So I hope that these are useful to you. I'll be sending them out on a regular basis. Number one, what is Kant's definition of enlightenment? I think that there are a couple of possible answers to that. One is something you can just get from the text. The other, I think, emerges from context in reading Kant. But his definition of enlightenment is more or less in the first line. Enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. So that's kind of like the most direct answer is the emergence from our self-imposed immaturity. But what is, in what respect does Kant think that we're immature, or what immaturity is? And he says here, immaturity is the inability to use one's understanding without guidance from another. So from that, we can conclude that his idea of enlightenment is having the ability to use your own understanding without guidance. That is, the capacity to think for yourself. That is not something you're born being able to do. It's something you have to achieve, right? So the answer is basically enlightenment is, Kant's idea of enlightenment is this coming out of, emergence from, an immaturity that he believes is self-imposed. That is, it's a matter of cowardice. He says we're not courageous enough to think for ourselves. But that's, I think, an interesting point, definitely arguable. But enlightenment is being able to think for yourself. That is, to emerge from that immaturity where you can't think for yourself. You simply have to have guidance, be told what to think. An enlightened person doesn't need to be told what to think. They can think for themselves. Number two, why does Kant think it is easier for an entire public to enlighten itself than for an individual to do so? That's kind of a tough question. If we look at the section I was thinking of, this is paragraph 3 here on the first page. Thus, it is difficult for any individual man to work himself out of the immaturity that has all but become his nature. And here in paragraph 4, he starts out by saying, but that the public should enlighten itself is more likely. And the question is why, right? Why is it easier for a public to enlighten itself than for an individual to enlighten themselves? He says, indeed, if it is only allowed freedom, enlightenment is almost inevitable. And then what he describes is a kind of a complicated, in a kind of a maybe a roundabout way, there comes the idea of free speech. The idea that, as he says here on page 2, the public use of reason must always be free, and it alone can bring about enlightenment among mankind. I think that the answer to this question, why it's easier for a public to enlighten itself than an individual, is that a public, we can listen to other voices. If you're working everything out on your own, it can be quite difficult. But if we have free speech so that people are exchanging ideas and opinions, then that makes it easier for us as a whole, as a community, to make progress towards enlightenment than it would be just on an individual working by themselves. So I think that's really the answer to that, is that it's easier for a public to enlighten itself because a public is made up of different minds exchanging ideas, all searching for the truth, all having different opinions. But we benefit from that. We benefit from hearing each other's speech, hearing each other's opinions, hearing each other's ideas, exchanging what we take to be knowledge. Number 3, what is all that is needed for a public to enlighten itself? That's what I just read. Um, as he says in paragraph 5 on the first page, nothing is required for this enlightenment except freedom. And the freedom in question is least harmful of all, namely the freedom to use reason publicly in all matters. So, enlightenment, he says, will occur of itself in a society, that a society will become more enlightened. Maybe not every individual, but the society as a whole will become more enlightened if it is free. And that freedom is what he's talking about. That the most essential part of that freedom is what he calls the freedom to use reason publicly in all matters. Now, that public use of reason also figures into it, but public use of reason is what in Kant's time was speaking in public, basically, and publishing books, newspapers, things like that, sharing opinions publicly. So the public use of reason is whenever we're addressing the public. Like right now, I am not engaging in the public use of reason because I'm addressing you, my class, my IH class, this particular group of people. If, however, I write a book or I write a letter to the editor to the newspaper or I get up and make a speech in public, I'm not addressing any particular group of people. I'm addressing the society as a whole. I'm addressing, let's say, the reading public if I write a book. So that's what Kant thinks has to remain free is that public use of reason. Reason when we get up and speak or address the world, write a book, write a magazine article, make a film, write a song, whatever it is, that's what he's saying has to be free, and that freedom will inevitably lead to enlightenment. Number 4, what is the difference between private and public use of reason? Well, I've just described what I take to be what he means by the public use of reason when we're addressing the public. The private use of reason is not when we're in our own homes. That's not what he means. Um, he says here on the second page, the first column, he says, I call the private use of reason that which a person may make in a civic post or office that has been entrusted to him. That is, if I'm a government official or I am a member of an institution or a church, then I can't always speak freely in the sense that I cannot always express my opinions. He gives a pretty good example of being a clergyman, being a pastor. Um, he says, likewise, a pastor who is bound to instruct his catechumens, I guess, in the congregation, in accordance with the symbol of the church he serves, for he was appointed on that condition. That is, if I'm a priest or a rabbi or some other clergy person and I'm addressing the congregation, I am an official. I am a representative of the institution. So, say I'm a Catholic priest. I may have all sorts of individual ideas about religion and morality of my own. But in my role as a Catholic priest, if I was one, I would have to stick to the orthodoxy of the Catholic Church. If I was a military official and I was making a public statement about the U.S. military, I may have my own ideas about things, but I would have to stick to the official position of the U.S. military, right? But crucially, I can then go home and write a book and publish it and say whatever I think. But because I'm no longer in the role of the representative of that institution, then I would be in the role of what he calls the scholar, the person who is addressing the whole world as a free person. And then I'm free to say whatever I want. That is, as he says, but as a scholar, he has complete freedom to impart to the public all of his carefully considered and well intentioned thoughts, even if they contradict this institution to which he belongs, because he's no longer in the role of representative of that institution when he's writing the book or she's writing the book. She takes on the role of the scholar. So the private use of reason is when we're in one of those roles where, of necessity, our freedom of speech is limited by our role as a representative of a certain institution. Number 5, what, according to Kant, is the original destiny of human nature? That's really interesting. I think it's over here. Let me see if I can find it. I just have to search for destiny. Right. Here it says, he's saying one age cannot bind itself and thus conspire to place a succeeding one in a condition whereby it would be impossible for the later age to expand its knowledge. That, he says, would be a crime against human nature, whose essential destiny lies precisely in such progress. So there is the answer to the question. What is the essential destiny of human nature? Or the original destiny of human nature? I'm sorry. I might be using different translations. It's progress towards knowledge, progress towards enlightenment. That is, it's this grand idea that the essence of the human species as a whole is to come closer and closer to enlightenment, which means knowledge of truth, both scientific and moral and political truth. Number 6, what is the difference between an enlightened age and an age of enlightenment? That's where he says, well, if we ask the question, do we live in an enlightened age? He says, no, but we do live in an age of enlightenment. Kant imagines an enlightened age to signify arrival at enlightenment, like a perfected, finished process where we are now at the end goal and we are enlightened. He says, if that's what enlightenment means, we're not enlightened yet because we're not there. An age of enlightenment, though, is getting closer to that, making progress towards that. Let's just point out where he says this. This is in paragraph 7. If it is now asked, do we presently live in an enlightened age? The answer is no, but we do live in an age of enlightenment. A great deal is lacking, et cetera, et cetera. But the obstacles are gradually diminishing. We're getting closer. And this is such an important part of how Kant imagines modern societies. Modern societies are not perfect by any means, but modern societies essentially are trying to perfect themselves. Finally, number 7, what is Kant suggesting at the end of the essay about the relation between, quote, the vocation to think freely and the principles of government? Gosh, you know what? I have no idea. I wrote these questions a while ago. Let's take a look at the end. He says, a greater degree of civil freedom seems advantageous to a people's spiritual freedom, yet the former established impassable boundaries for the latter. Conversely, a lesser degree of civil freedom provides enough room for all fully to expand their abilities. Thus, once nature has removed the hard shell from this kernel, for which she has most fondly cared, namely the inclination to and vocation for free thinking, the kernel gradually reacts on people's mentalities, whereby they become increasingly able to act freely, and it finally even influences the principles of government, which finds that it can profit by treating men who are now more than machines in accordance with their dignity. Now I do remember what I meant. Kant has this idea that political freedom can be restricted temporarily, but if you let people think freely and you let them speak freely, eventually what will come out of that is they will be able to act freely. That is, if we get in the habit of thinking for ourselves and dedicating ourselves to the use of our reason, then eventually we can be trusted with freedom. We can be granted freedom, right? Because we're closer to being enlightened creatures. So basically what he's telling the government is that the principles of government will eventually need to respond to that. That is, the principles of government will eventually have to allow for a free society. I mean, free in every way, politically free, essentially a democratic society. Because if people have enough time to enlighten themselves through the free public use of reason, they will eventually become more enlightened creatures who won't need to be governed, really, because they can govern themselves. So Kant thinks that enlightenment moves forward through free thinking, more and more people being able to think for themselves and to think for themselves more and more, and that eventually government has to recognize that it has to grant freedom to those people because they are enlightened. So really quite interesting claim on his part.